everybody. I'm going to try to get this computer situated such that, there we go. That looks a little better. So I am Dr. Jerry Novack, and today we are talking on our 60-day challenge mindset coaching call. We're going to talk about mindset. I referenced mindset a little bit in our last week's call. So last week's call talked about self-compassion, fierce self-compassion specifically. And Brenda is joining me. So let's let Brenda in and say hello. Hi, Brenda. How are you today?
Good.
Okay. So Brenda, I was just introducing the topic for today. And so today we are talking about mindset. And in a sort of a global sense, all of these calls are about mindset, right? Whether we're talking about mindfulness or whether we're talking about self-compassion or whether we're talking about even just habits, we're talking about mindset. But there's a specific area of study. The primary researcher, scientist in this area of study is Dr. Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. And Dr. Dweck has identified two types of mindset in her research. She has identified a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And her research has demonstrated a couple of things that are really interesting. And they've indicated that her research has demonstrated that there are predictable outcomes to a growth mindset and predictable outcomes to a fixed mindset. And spoiler alert, the growth mindset tends to, people who are able to cultivate a growth mindset tend to have better outcomes than people who cultivate a fixed mindset. And we'll get into what those things mean and why. The other thing her research has demonstrated is that, well, the next thing, let's say, is that everyone has a mix of growth and fixed mindset within themselves. There are certain areas of our lives in which we are more willing to have a growth mindset. And then there are other areas of our lives where we're a little bit more guarded and we tend to sort of retreat into a fixed mindset. And then the last piece of her research that we will look at today anyway suggests, however, that we can develop a growth mindset. So if we find areas in our lives where our mindset tends to be kind of fixed, we can develop more of a growth mindset approach. This is also important for coaching and for parenting because we can cultivate a growth mindset in others. So we can raise our children to have a growth mindset. We can train our clients or our athletes or our whoever, whatever we're coaching, our executives, our chess players, our actors, to approach their efforts with a growth mindset. So let's start with what is a growth mindset? What is a fixed mindset? So I would say that maybe the easiest way to explain them is with their sort of underlying assumption, right? A growth mindset has a set of tendencies and behaviors that are associated with it. And a fixed mindset has a set of behaviors and tendencies that are associated with it. But the reason they have those tendencies is because of their underlying assumptions. So the growth mindset assumes, well, let's start with the fixed mindset. The fixed mindset assumes that ability in any given area is fixed. right? Whether we're talking about IQ or musical ability or chess playing ability or anything of that sort, the fixed mindset assumes that our capacity for those things is finite, is fixed. Well, based on that assumption, it doesn't make sense to put effort into improving things you're not good at because your capacity is fixed. So if you're not a good singer, somebody with a fixed mindset is not going to work on improving their singing. And so the behaviors and the tendencies that are associated with the fixed mindset, people with a fixed mindset tend to avoid challenges, right? If I'm a terrible chess player, I'm going to avoid playing chess with anyone who's better than me because all it's going to do is expose my weaknesses, right? It's a threat to play with chess with somebody better than I am, right? Depending on how good or bad I am at it, I might avoid playing altogether. But if I'm a middle of the road chess player and I have a fixed mindset, then I'm most likely to only play chess against people who are worse than I am, so I can feel good about myself, right? People with a fixed mindset tend to react badly to feedback.
Oh,
So if you try to give them feedback or help them improve or, constructive criticism, they tend to take that very personally as a threat and to react very badly to that kind of feedback. A growth mindset, by contrast, assumes that with effort, we can improve our ability on virtually anything. Now, that doesn't mean that it's unrealistic. So, for example, to use my singing example, if you are not a great singer, somebody with a fixed mindset assumes that's it, you're just not a great singer. Somebody with a growth mindset doesn't necessarily, right? They may recognize that I'll probably never sing at Carnegie Hall, right? Or I'll probably never sing in the Metropolitan Opera. But with effort, I can be a better singer next week than I am this week. I can grow. So what happens for people with a growth mindset is that everybody's a little bit of both. But with a growth mindset, we tend to be more willing to engage in challenges. In fact, we're kind of excited by challenges, right? We're not necessarily threatened by the idea of losing. All right, to use my chess example, if I'm a mediocre chess player, but I have a growth mindset, I might be excited by the opportunity to play chess with somebody who's much, much better than I am, because even though I know I'll lose, I have the opportunity to learn, right? We see challenges as the opportunity to grow, to get better. Similarly, people with a growth mindset are way more open to feedback. What that means to be open to feedback is there's a range. For things that feel a little less personal to us, a little less threatening, we may be perfectly willing to accept feedback. For things that feel a little bit more sensitive or a little bit more personal, we may still, it may still be hard to hear feedback. We may still maybe get our feelings hurt a little bit or not like the feedback we're getting. But people with a growth mindset tend to have the tools to overcome their own hurt feelings and take what's valuable from the feedback. Right? If you could imagine having given a performance or a presentation of some sort, and really feeling like it went well, feeling very proud of yourself, and believing that you did a really great job. And then having somebody, a coach or a teacher or somebody, give you some feedback about the things you could have done better might be a little bit hurtful at first, because it's like, oh, I thought I did really well. Somebody with a fixed mindset will likely get very hurt by that feedback, such that they can't even employ it to improve themselves, right? They'll just be angry. Somebody with a growth mindset might still have hurt feelings because they thought they did better than or they just weren't expecting the criticism or whatever it might be. But they can sort of see past that and force themselves to sit with the feedback and with the criticism in the interest of applying it and improving their overall performance.
Right.
So I will share with myself, that when it comes to something, so I have a great love for jujitsu. That's my sport that I like to practice. And I will tell you that my mindset when it comes to jujitsu ebbs and flows, because one of the things that I really love about jujitsu is there's no mastering it ever. There's so much to know, and so much strategy, and so much physics in it, and so much athleticism, and so much that all of these areas you're just always improving, and whenever you're improving on one, you're seeing shortcomings in the other, and it's just you're just always a beginner at jiu-jitsu.
Wow.
No matter how good you are, there's somebody who's waiting to clean the mats with you, and expose what you're not good at. There are times in my life when that dynamic is incredibly exciting to me. There are times in my life where I love the ongoing learning. I love the beginner mindset. I love being able to grow and to check my ego at the door and to just, learn. There are other times when it's more difficult to check my ego at the door. And there are times when, even though I've been training in jiu-jitsu for a number of years and I'm maybe adequate, middle of the road at it, I don't want to go and get beat up for 2 hours. It's hard on me. It's hard on my ego. And there's a tendency, I'm advanced enough that I could just choose partners who are beginners and feel very good about myself. Yeah, Brenda's laughing at me. But it happens, right? And I have to keep myself in check, because there are times where, even there are even people in the jiu-jitsu school who are not as high ranking as I am. They have a lower belt than I do. But for whatever reason, their approach to it just gives me trouble, and sometimes they can even be better than I am. Like, they can beat me, where maybe in terms of overall knowledge, I'm more advanced than they are, but for whatever reason, their style gives my style trouble, and they are better than I am. And there's a part of my ego that doesn't want to admit that somebody who's a lower belt than I am can beat me. And so there's a tendency to want to avoid training with those people, right? Because it's frustrating. Now, the growth mindset approach would be to seek those people out so that I can tighten up whatever holes are in my game, and I can grow and I can improve. But I can tell you that on any given, let's say any given month, over the course of the 4 weeks, my growth versus fixed mindset will ebb and flow, right? So the point is to say that nobody is all growth mindset and nobody is all fixed mindset. Now, for things that feel less personal to you and things that don't reflect on your ego or your character in some way, then we tend to have an easier time with a growth mindset, right? I am not a terrific accountant. I'm okay with math, I'm okay with money, but I don't know tons about accounting. So for me to sit with somebody and be taught about accounting, very easy for me to have a growth mindset because nothing about it hits me personally. I don't feel like a failure for not being a great accountant, for not being awesome at budgeting or doing my own taxes or whatever. I have no, for whatever reason, I have no personal, it's not tied to my value, to my worth. So, um, so I don't, it's very easy for me to have a growth mindset to learn. When it comes to something like jujitsu, losing in jujitsu, getting beaten in jujitsu is legitimately a product of being physically bested. And while I don't, my rational mind understands that I don't need to have my worth or value tied to that, there is a piece of me that feels sensitive about it, that feels a need to defend it, to protect it. And so there's some sort of shame or something associated with being physically bested. And it makes it harder for me to just be open to training and losing and whatever. I wonder, Brenda, as I'm saying all this, if you have experiences and if it's sounding familiar to things in your life where you're maybe a little more open to criticism and feedback and growth in certain areas, but a little more sensitive in other areas.
I can't think of the area that I would be more sensitive. I think I take it the way it's presented to me.
Mhm.
The person who's critiquing, the way they present it to me would
Right.
be where I would feel bad or sensitive or hurt.
Yep.
It's the presentation. I feel more that I would be more willing to learn or understand.
Right.
So I would be more on the growth than the
Okay.
fix. But right now I can't think of an area that I'm more fixed in.
Okay. So what Brenda's saying is she's saying that she can't think of an area in her life where she's more in a fixed mindset. She feels like she's pretty growth oriented and willing to take feedback. But the big determinant for her is how it's presented. If the feedback is presented constructively and gently, she's willing to hear it. If it's presented with cruelty or if it's harsh, then maybe it's a little harder for you to accept it, right?
Right. And not necessarily accept it. It's just how I feel, like my feelings,
Yeah,
how my feelings. I'll chew on it and
right.
play it over and over. But if the person
Yeah.
presents it in a negative way, it'll take me a long time.
Okay.
My
So, right.
brain
Yeah.
criticizing.
So I think that's pretty normal. And what Brenda's saying is if it's presented to her harshly, it takes longer for her to get value out of it. She has to chew on it longer because there's some hurt feelings if it's presented harshly. And so her ability to just accept it, she has to first overcome the hurt feelings from how it was presented. And again, that's an indication of this continuum, right? So when we talk about growth and fixed mindset, it's not either or, it's, a continuum. And so Brenda sounds like she has very much a growth mindset. But if somebody presents feedback to her in a harsh way, she has to work a little harder to get there, right? It may, the defensiveness around like why they're being cruel to you may put you in at least temporarily in a bit of a fixed state where you don't want to hear it right away and you have to process it to get back to where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were in a purely growth mindset all the time, which nobody is, but if you were, it wouldn't matter how they presented it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's your mindset. then they can't change it, right? It doesn't matter how big a jerk they are. If you're in a state of mind where you're always looking for the growth opportunities and you're always wanting to improve, and you would have a deaf ear to their tone, and you would just take what was useful. But most of us can't do that all the time. Few of us can do that all the time. So, and my guess, Brenda, would be if we really followed you around all day long and watched and dug deep, we might find some areas of your life where things are a little more fixed and a little more growth oriented. And the way to notice that would be, for example, in areas where, so there's probably areas in your life where if I were to give you feedback, I could just give you the feedback, and I wouldn't be cruel or mean about it, but I could just kind of say what was on my mind and you'd be willing to hear it. There are probably other areas of your life where you're still willing to hear it, but I maybe need to be a little more gentle with how I present it, because those areas are a little more sensitive. If that's the case, then we're a little more fixed in those areas.
Right.
Right. If there's a requirement, if there's a need for me to be extra gentle or extra attentive or mindful about how I'm presenting the feedback, because you're more likely to have your feelings hurt, then those are areas where we're a little more fixed in our mindset.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about is not necessarily my feelings hurt, but but more of having my mind set on the way I've already learned.
Yeah,
something.
right. So Brenda's saying it may be less about having her feelings hurt and more about just having her mind set on, like, she already knows or believes a thing to be this way, and it's hard to receive feedback to make it a different way.
Right. And
Now,
it depends on the presentation from that person.
yes, right. And so then in order for a person to get through to her and to provide that feedback, that person probably has to work a little harder and be a little more mindful about how they're presenting it so that Brenda can stay open to possibility, right?
That's correct.
Okay, good. Yeah. So the example that sort of rings loudest for me as a trainer is here at the gym. We have a machine called the InBody machine. And the InBody machine measures people's weight, it measures their body fat percent, it measures their muscle mass, and it measures water content, hydration. And in terms of tracking people's progress in the gym, it can be a very useful tool. Now, obviously, if somebody's goals are just to get stronger or just to get faster, the InBody doesn't necessarily help a whole lot because it doesn't measure how fast you are or how strong you are. But most people are looking for some sort of body composition, body mass outcome with their fitness goals. So some people want to gain muscle and gain weight. Some people want to burn fat. Some people want to lose weight, right? And unfortunately, we live in a culture, in a society where our worth and value is very tied up in our weight and in our appearance. And that doesn't impact everyone, but it impacts a lot of people. And so one of the things I've noticed with I like to take measurements on the InBody with clients because it gives me really useful metrics. And then over time, I can track progress and see it. And it also really helps nutritionally because as muscle mass increases, so does metabolic rate. And so we can make sure that people are eating enough, but not overeating. We can gauge their macronutrients and things like that based on the amount of muscle mass they carry. So it's a useful metric. However, I find very often that when people, especially when I recommend, well, why don't we start on the InBody? Even just walking over to the InBody, people start making, we'll say making excuses, explaining, well, for the last couple of months, I've been kind of off my diet, I haven't been training really well, or I've been sick, and they're setting the stage. And then, as the InBody is measuring, and it's funny, this even happens with people who have healthy body fat. It happens with people who have good body composition. They have a lot of muscle and their fat's in a healthy range. They still see the numbers and get very defensive. Oh God, I can't believe I let myself get to this. Oh, so terrible. I can't believe I weigh that much. And what happens with those folks is it becomes much, much harder to design a fitness plan because their relationship to the numbers is personal and sensitive. And so what ends up happening is they get a fixed mindset about it where they want to guard this area that for some reason brings up, I don't know what, shame or embarrassment or something for them. And so their willingness to just sort of accept where they are and create a plan to get to where they want to be is limited by this emotional reaction. Whereas people who just the numbers are the numbers, has nothing to do with their self-worth, has nothing to do with who they are, or how they are as a human being. And it's just like, okay, here's where our body fat is, here's where our muscle mass is, here's where our overall weight is, here's what our resting metabolism is, and here's based on whatever your goals are. If your goals are to, increase muscle mass and put on a few pounds, then here's the nutritional plan and fitness plan that can get you from A to B, and they can take that without any emotional reaction to it and implement it, right? Those folks tend to have a much easier time than the folks who have all these judgments based on those numbers. And then, implementing the program every time they come to work out or every time they sit down to eat, it's bringing up for them this very sensitive issue. Right. Last week, we talked about self-compassion. And in the discussion on self-compassion, I talked about a study in which students at an Ivy League school were given a vocabulary test that they were intended to fail. Right. It was a vocabulary test that was so difficult that it was unlikely anybody would pass it. And with one group, they coached them on how to practice self-compassion. Right? You say things to yourself like, well, everyone fails a test once in a while. Like, obviously, I'm smart. I come to this very good school. Clearly, I did not prepare well for this exam, but it's not a reflection of my overall academic ability. The people who got no coaching, and we assume that with no coaching, they were probably more critical on themselves. How could I be so stupid? I can't believe I failed this test. Oh my goodness, like, what does it say? I don't belong here. I don't belong in this good school. And then both groups were given a period of time in which they were going to take the test again. And what they found was the group that practiced self-compassion actually studied much harder for the second test than the group that didn't. And again, the reason is because the group that didn't, the group that was more self-critical, created such an uncomfortable, sort of shame-filled, embarrassing environment for themselves that every time they sat down to study, it served as a reminder of their failure.
Oh.
And so they were motivated to avoid it. They were motivated not to deal with it. Whereas the group that didn't have that embarrassment, the group that had self-compassion and felt like, okay, everybody fails a test once in a while, and I just need to prepare differently, and right, that group had no problem sitting down to study for the follow-up, right? And so there's some overlap here because the self-compassion group ended up having more of a growth mindset. They were willing, because they didn't view the failure as somehow tied into their character, to their worth. They were more willing to just face it head on and prepare. Right? They saw the failure as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to better prepare for next time. Whereas the group that saw the failure as a critique of their intelligence, was motivated to avoid it. I don't know if that's making some sense. People who, again, when we feel like our capacity or our ability is fixed, when we feel like, I'll only ever be this good of a chess player, then I'm motivated. I'm not motivated to be, if I'm let me start again. I'm tripping over myself. If I'm only a mediocre chess player and I have an opportunity to play a friend in chess who is also a mediocre player, meaning we're probably about evenly matched, right? I'm not going to want to play my friend in chess because there's a threat that he's going to beat me, which will then just highlight my shortcomings, right? And that's the fixed mindset piece. The growth mindset is excited about playing a friend who's maybe equally matched, because if I win, great, but if I don't, I get to tighten up some of the holes in my game. Right? I'm not worried about it exposing my weakness. Right? I want my weakness exposed because I want to work on it.
Right.
Right? Well, that's the underlying belief, right? I want to work on it. I want my weakness exposed because I want to work on it, because there's an underlying belief that working on it will improve it. If I have a fixed mindset, I want to avoid having my weaknesses exposed, because if they are exposed, it's embarrassing and there's no sense in trying to work on it because it's fixed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how do we cultivate a growth mindset, right? Now that we've talked about what it is and how it manifests in our lives, we may find that there are areas in our lives where we have more of a fixed mindset. I'll share one more about my personal life that will hopefully illustrate it, especially as it pertains to this 60-day challenge and people's fitness and lifestyle goals. So I have asthma. For most of my life, my asthma has not bothered me at all. It just makes me sound really bad. I wheeze a lot. And so when I'm working out, it sounds bad, but I feel fine. And I've always been athletic and I've always been able to work out at a very high level. I just wheeze. About 2 years ago, I got COVID. And since COVID, my asthma has been awful. In fact, for about a year, I could barely make it up a flight of stairs without running out of breath. And for those people who know me, that's a big statement. I tend to work out at a pretty high level, and I train jujitsu and I do intense things. I've completed several Spartan races. And so for me to not climb a flight of stairs is pretty big stuff, but literally, like, I couldn't. It wasn't just, I felt tired or I was out of shape. In my house, I had like 6 stairs from the main level to the upstairs. I would climb those 6 stairs sometimes and just lie down in the hallway at the top of the stairs to catch my breath. So now what's happening is I'm starting to get back to the point where I can do some cardio respiratory work, and I'm getting to the point where I can run a little bit and I can do some stair climber and I can do some intervals on the air bike, and I'm starting to work out cardio again, but it's nowhere near where it was. Now my asthma is very prominent and it's very hard for me to breathe. While the growth mindset part of myself recognizes that if I keep, it's gotten better, it's taken a while, but it's gotten better. And if I keep working on it, it will continue to get better. And I need to improve it for overall health and for athletic performance. My growth mindset part of myself gets that. My fixed mindset part of myself does not like to feel weak.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it's time to do my cardio work in the gym, I'm very motivated most of the time to skip it. And I can come up with all these reasons why I should skip it, right? I'm going to get all sweaty and I don't have time for a shower before my next client, or I find all these reasons to avoid it. and if I'm being honest with myself, the reason I'm trying to avoid it is because I know I'm not good at it and it makes me feel weak and unathletic to do it.
Mm.
So how do I help if I know I have both sides of myself, right? I know that I've got this growth minded part and I've got this fixed minded part. How do I cultivate that growth side more so that I'll be more motivated to do the work? And the trick to that is very simple. It's not always easy in real life. We can miss the opportunities easily, but it's not complicated. And the key, according to Carol Dweck, the main researcher here, the key to cultivating a growth mindset is to keep our focus on effort and not on outcome.
Oh, okay.
Right? So what this looks like, for example, in raising children, right? I'm pretty lucky. Both my kids tend to be very good at school and they get good grades and they do really well in school. If my kid comes home with a math test or whatever and shows me that he's gotten A's on everything, and I say, buddy, I'm so proud of you. You're so smart. I have taken one step toward cultivating a fixed mindset, right? Because if him bringing home A's means he's smart, and somewhere down the road he struggles with something and gets a C or a D, what does that say about him, right? Now he's not so smart. Maybe it means he's dumb. And so he's going to be motivated to hide C's and D's from me. Okay? He's not going to want me to see that he's not smart. If we rewind and my kid brings home a bunch of papers and tests and shows me that he's gotten all A's, and I say to him, hey, buddy, I am so proud of you. You work so hard to get good grades. I'm really proud of how much attention you put into your schoolwork. Well, now I'm praising his effort. And if he tries really hard at something and gets a C or a D, then we can sit down and say, okay, I know you tried really hard and that's okay. Everybody struggles with something, right? Let's see if we can figure out how to prepare for the next exam more effectively than we did this one. Let's see if we can figure out, like, you know, where we're falling short a little bit and maybe try to work a little harder. It's no longer a threat. The C or the D or even the F no longer means he's dumb, right? If the A means he's smart, then the C or D means he must be dumb. If the A, I'm proud of the fact that he worked really hard and that he prioritizes his schoolwork, and he comes home with the C, he could have still worked really hard and prioritized his schoolwork. We just need a different strategy, and it says nothing about his character. The other thing that I try to do anyway is in between bouts of, like, when he's not showing me grades, every once in a while I try to remind him and just have a conversation with him where I say to him, you know, everybody struggles with things sometimes, even me, even his mom, and that it's okay if he struggles with things as long as he's trying hard.
Yeah.
And that's what I care about. When my kids play sports, first thing is I don't coach my kids in sports. I let their coaches coach them. So I don't stand on the sidelines and scream or yell or whatever. But after the game, win, lose, or draw, with my kids, I never go over what they did well in the field, what they didn't do well, I always say to them, I'm so proud of you. I love to watch you play. Right? What they're getting from me is they're getting rewarded for the effort. I know the counter arguments. I'm not suggesting that my kids should not be competitive. I'm not suggesting that it doesn't matter if they win or lose. What I'm doing is I'm following the research that says that if I teach them to focus on effort over outcome, they will put in more effort and will end up winning more than they lose. But when they do eventually lose, it will not become a source of shame. and they will not feel embarrassed by it. They will feel more motivated to get back to the drawing board and figure out where they went wrong and make the adjustments. And this is true on our 60-day journeys. This is true of our fitness lifestyles. We all have a kryptonite of some sort, right? At the moment, for me, it's cardio. The other thing that tends to be kryptonite for me is diet. I unfortunately have the genetics that react very badly to sugar. And all sorts of sugar, not just refined sugars, but pastas and breads and things of that sort. Diabetes is rampant in my family. And when I take a fasting glucose test, even though it ends up normal, doctors are always telling me that the very early stages, my insulin reaction is dramatic, right? And that's just genetics. After that initial dramatic reaction, my lifestyle takes over and it evens out and I end up fine. And I'm a foodie. I like food, and I believe that good meals are a part of enjoying one's life. I think we should enjoy our food. And I understand that if most of the time, if 80% or 85% of the time I am eating well and I'm getting carbohydrates specifically from whole food sources that have lots of fiber and nutrients and such, and don't spike my blood sugar too much, and I'm also training and working out and keeping muscle mass, that my body will handle sugars better. And then the other 15% of the time, if I want to splurge, it should be okay, right? But, we're coming up rapidly on Thanksgiving, and we're coming up rapidly on the holiday season and Christmas and New Year's, and there's lots of food-oriented things that go on and social things that go on. And I know people who don't eat for entertainment. I know people who, like, food is their fuel, and if they're going to a party or a dinner or something, they eat before they go so that they can not indulge. I actually am okay with food being a social lubricant. I'm okay with food being part of what we do interpersonally and in our families and sharing meals. But it is easy for me to sort of fall off the wagon food wise. If I can keep a growth mindset, then I don't walk away from a meal where I splurged, or even a week or month where I splurged, and hate myself for it. I don't have to walk away and punish myself or beat myself up or try to hide what I'm eating from people, binge eat in private and things of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
If I can maintain my growth mindset, I can walk into those environments, those situations, with a plan. I can walk in with an idea of when it's okay to splurge, when I'm going to have desserts or drinks or eat meals, that I normally wouldn't, high carb kind of pasta dishes and things. And I can walk away from those situations. If I've stuck to my plan, I can walk away feeling good about myself and reinforcing this approach of having a plan for the next time. And if I've deviated from my plan and not done what I wanted, I can go back to the drawing board and look for what happened. What made me unable or unwilling to stick to my plan, right? What was it that drew me away? Did I maybe have a couple of drinks and then I was less inhibited and more likely to deviate from my plan? Or did I maybe, I don't know, start munching on, on some appetizer or something that was a bad choice that like increased cravings for the rest of the meal? Or I can just look at it. Was I not mindful? Was I eating mindlessly and not paying attention? And I can think about strategies to do better for next time if I'm growth oriented. if I have a fixed mindset around these things and there's shame involved, it's going to be very hard for me to adjust on the next time. Is that making some sense? Sounding right?
It does. It makes sense. It just brought in a thought for me. Last night, I prepared my food and I was doing good, but it got interrupted by someone and that brought anxiety to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was eating the food and probably faster than I wanted to, but
Right.
mindlessly,
Yes.
mindlessly eating. And then later was I felt like hungry and I couldn't figure out why. And so I ate some beef jerky, but I couldn't figure out why am I hungry because I would have been definitely full.
Right.
But it was the mindless eating. So when you mentioned mindless eating, it triggered like, oh, that's what happened.
So Brenda's sharing that last night she was doing some meal prep and she felt like she was doing really good with her eating and with her food. And then she had an encounter with somebody that raised her anxiety and she started to eat mindlessly because of the emotional response. And that sort of threw her off for the rest of the night. And she found herself hungry when she normally wouldn't be and had to kind of figure out how to get back on track and recover from that. And so, yes, right. That's another issue is like, did something emotional occur that made me eat for emotional reasons, right? And what's my strategy to deal with that in the future, you know? And the takeaway point that I'm hoping people will glean from this is that there's abundant obstacles in anything you're trying to achieve, right? If you want to achieve your fitness goals, whatever those may be, whether it's running a marathon or whether it's losing 10 pounds or whether it's gaining 10 pounds of muscle, whatever those goals are, if you want to achieve those goals, right? If you want to achieve your educational goals, you want to get a master's degree or a PhD, if you want to achieve your interpersonal goals, if you want to achieve your even just sort of recreational goals, right? You want to be a better chess player, you want to get good at jujitsu, you want whatever it is. Obstacles always abound, right? Unless you're one of those very rare people who will pursue this thing wholeheartedly and sacrifice everything else in your life to do it, right? If you look at the elite, you know, performers, ballet dancers, actors, actresses, athletes, right? Martial artists, they tend to the ones that we watch on pay-per-view or on go to the theater to see have typically made tremendous sacrifices that we would be unwilling to make in order to pursue those goals. For the rest of us, the obstacles abound. There's obstacles everywhere. There's family obstacles. There's work obstacles. There's, you know, housekeeping type obstacles at home. There's all these demands on our time and on our energy and all of these things that could potentially get in the way. And there will be times when we manage the obstacles well and we find a way to balance pursuing our goals with taking care of the needs of ourselves and our loved ones. And there are other times where the obstacles will get the better of us and we will deviate from the goals we wanted to achieve. The more we cultivate the growth mindset, the more we can focus on effort over outcome, the more we can keep emotion and personal identity out of it, the better we will be at recovering from those, from recognizing, okay, there was an obstacle and the obstacle got the better of me and knocked me off track. And without shame and without, oh, I'm so weak and I always fall off track and this is so awful, without any of that, if it's just the facts, right? Just, well, there was an obstacle and it distracted me and it got me off my eating program or off my fitness program. And how do I get back on track and maybe plan for that obstacle in the future? The better off you're going to be in the long run, right? The more there's an emotional charge to it, the more we feel shame about it, the more we're embarrassed about it, the more we're disappointed in ourselves and we feel like we constantly fail at this, the harder it's going to be to get back on track and plan for the future. So hopefully people are seeing that there's very close relationships between growth mindset and self-compassion and mindfulness. These things are all tied in, and they can all contribute to those 5 stages of motivation that we talked about in the beginning. And so I want to encourage everyone to work on cultivating that growth mindset and do it through self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. It doesn't mean you don't have standards. It doesn't mean you don't hold yourself to a high standard. It just means you hold yourself to a high standard the way you would with somebody else you love in your life. You would do it with some compassion, with some empathy, and you would do it in a way that empowers them to work harder instead of fills them with shame and dread, so they want to avoid whatever it is we're dealing with. Does that sound about right to you, Brenda?
It sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. All righty. Well, I'm gonna call it a day for growth mindset. If anybody's interested in and is interested in more information, of course, there's plenty of research journals on mindset, research articles, peer-reviewed articles. Most of those are pretty dense and hard to read. But Carol Dweck has published a book. Her book is called Mindset, and it's an easy read and it's a quick read, and it very succinctly synthesizes the findings from her studies and her research. So I recommend the book to people who want to learn more about cultivating a growth mindset. And if you do experiment with some of this and you come up with questions or comments or want to share any of your results, I would encourage anyone to come find me in person, message me, text me, and let me know how you're doing with these things. And if you're doing great, let's celebrate your success. If you're having some troubles, let's figure out how to help you along. But please let me know how you're making out with it all. So thank you so much for joining, Brenda. And
Okay.
thank you everyone else for watching and listening. And we will see you next week.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? While I'm thinking about it, next week I am out of town and I will be traveling next Sunday. So what I will try to do, I think the plan is that I will record next week's session during the week and post it somewhere where you can access it and watch on your own if you would like, because I will not be here live next week. So I will see you back live in 2 weeks.
All right.
So take care, everybody. Thanks, Brenda.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.